Alright, so this is my video portion of my final exam for A&P1. So question 5 is show the drawing of the multipolar neuron. So this is my drawing, and in the neuron, information flows from the dendrites to the cell body, then down the axon. These are the dendrites, the cell body, the axon hillocks, and then the axon and the synaptic knobs. The neurotransmitter is received at the cell body when the synaptic knobs of another neuron bind to it. The neurotransmitter is released through the synaptic knobs of this neuron. The synaptic knobs are the ends of the axon, and they are full of synaptic vessels that hold neurotransmitter. And the synaptic cleft is the space between the synaptic knob and the receptor. So that would be the space between the cell body and the synaptic knobs. So question 9 is, the portions of the neuron that are considered the receptive segment are the dendrites and the cell body, so this section. The kinds of membrane protein channels found here are chemically gated cation channels, chemically gated potassium channels, and chemically gated chlorine channels. The membrane protein channels that are not found here are voltage-gated channels. In this part of the neuron, information travels through the dendrites and is sent to the cell body. There, the neuron will decide what the response will be to the stimulus it just received. The portion of the neuron that is considered the initial segment is the axon hillocks. The membrane protein channels that are found here are voltage-gated sodium channels and potassium channels. Chemically gated channels are not found here. In this portion of the neuron, action potentials are initiated. Once they are initiated, they are let travel down the axon. The portion of the neuron that is considered the transmissive segment is the synaptic bulbs. The membrane protein channels that are not found here are voltage-gated calcium channels and calcium pumps. Chemically gated channels are not found here. In this portion of the neuron, the synaptic vessels and the synaptic knobs release neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft. Once it released, it will bind to the receptors on a neuron. So, question 13 is this graph. So in step 1, the first step is whenever the axon is at rest. Nothing has happened yet, so you can see that it's starting out at negative 70 millivolts. In step 2, you can see a slight incline, and it represents graded potentials. You cannot see it very well on this graph, but there would be little stair steps that work their way up to the threshold, which is negative 55 millivolts. Once the threshold has been reached, then it moves into part 3. So step 3 is depolarization, which means the voltage-gated sodium channels open, allowing sodium to flow in the axon at a rapid speed. When this happens, the axon becomes more positive, and that's why the graph has an incline. When it became more positive, the voltage increased to positive 30 millivolts, and that's where it is. In step 4, the voltage-gated sodium channels are starting to close, and the voltage-gated potassium channels are starting to open. And this is now repolarization because the axon is becoming more negative when the potassium is moving out of the cell. So as you can see, the membrane potential is going down. In step 5, there is a little dip where it is falling below resting membrane potential, and this is called hyperpolarization. All this means is the voltage-gated potassium channels were open too long, so it became more negative past the point of resting membrane potential. Now in step 6, the voltage-gated potassium channels have closed because the membrane potential has returned to negative 70 millivolts, where it started at. Alright, and question 15. Describe the location of the different lobes of the cerebral cortex. So the frontal lobe is toward the front of the brain and acts as the main control center of human functions such as emotional expression, personality, communication, and judgment, to name a few. The temporal lobe is on both sides of the brain, like where the temporal bone is. And in this lobe, sound and smells are processed and is why we can hear and smell. The parietal lobe is right behind the frontal lobe. This lobe functions to process things like shape and texture as well as sensory information about the location and size of the body. The occipital lobe is the back end of the brain. This lobe analyzes things that we see and also stores it as memories. So, questions 17 through 20. The axillary nerve runs across the shoulder and innervates the deltoid muscle as well as the teres minor. These muscles allow us to abduct and rotate our arm. The median nerve runs along the arm through the fingers, excluding the pinky finger. This nerve innervates anterior forearm muscles and thumb muscles. The median nerve allows us to flex our wrists and move some of our fingers. The musculocutaneous nerve runs along the arm and ends in the forearm, innervating the anterior arm muscles. This nerve flexes the humerus and elbow joint and supinates the forearm. The radial nerve runs along the back side of the arm through the fingers, again excluding the pinky finger, innervating the posterior arm muscles, posterior forearm muscles, and brachioradialis. This nerve flexes the forearm and extends it as well as extending the wrist and fingers. The ulnar nerve runs down the arm and ends in the pinky finger and part of the ring finger. It innervates the anterior forearm muscles and intrinsic hand muscles. This nerve flexes the wrist and included fingers. The femoral nerve runs down from the thigh and innervates the anterior thigh muscles. This nerve flexes our hip and knee. The tibial nerve runs down from the top of the thigh down to the base of the toes. This nerve innervates posterior thigh muscles, posterior leg muscles, and plantar foot muscles. This collects sensations from the lower leg and foot. The common fibular nerve runs down from the top of the leg down through the toes and innervates the short head of the biceps femoris. This nerve flexes the knee and also allows us to move our toes. The deep fibular nerve runs down from the shin and ends at the toes. This nerve innervates anterior leg muscles and dorsum foot muscles, allowing us to flex our foot and extend our toes. The superficial fibular nerve runs down the shin along the outside, all the way down to the toes. This nerve innervates lateral leg muscles and works the top of the foot, allowing us to flex it. So for question 20, a reflex is a response that we have to something and it is not on purpose. This is our body responding to something before we tell it to. For example, if I were to prick my finger with a needle, I don't have one, but a pencil, that sensation would move from my spinal cord or my brain where it can be processed, then sent to the effector, so my finger would move out of the way from the place that is causing pain.